Chapter 6, Incident Response, Incident Management, Dealing with an incident, dealing with the first 30 minutes. This is that part of the continuity process where you need to make sure that people are alive long enough for you to be able to do business continuity. So as the incident just happened, what's the stuff that we need to do to make sure that we're kind of good in the immediate future from that happening? What's that immediate response that we're doing? When you're doing this within a continuity process, this is fairly quick to do. A lot of the stuff is fairly straightforward. By and large, you're just having a conversation about, hey, how are we going to handle this? Write some stuff down. Okay, we'll throw it in a plan. This should not be a very difficult process. Frankly, deciding how to evacuate a building is far simpler than all the continuity analysis you've just done. If you could do the previous parts of this process, this section is going to be a cakewalk. It's still important because, let's be honest here, if your staff are dead, they're not implementing continuity, but it doesn't have to be complex. In fact, and we'll probably get into this in a different series and different sorts of videos that focus on emergency management and things like that. With emergencies, by necessity, kind of the higher the stakes go and the more immediate things are, the simpler things need to become so that you can deal with the thing practically. You can't really do something quick and complex that also works. It's just there's too many moving parts, so things kind of become simple and straightforward by necessity. Anyways, I've grouped the stuff you need to consider in incident response as any general organization into 5 broad categories. And a lot of this is talking, but some of the last category in particular might require some kind of drawing out to explain. These categories are plan, activation. So this is how are we going to activate our plan? So we have this plan. Under what conditions does it come into play? We have, I call it emergency notification, but really this is how do we communicate? Emergency notification. I don't like using words that are more than 7 letters when I can avoid it, but c'est la vie. Next we have life and safety. So we have to consider how to keep people alive. There's a bunch of different things this is described as. The common thing that I've heard it described as kind of in jargon is immediate security protocols. But really this is, okay, we found out how to activate our plan. We found out how to do communication of this, how to say, hey guys, you know, this is what you need to do. We're dealing with how to keep people alive. How do we deal with stuff? This is pretty much the stuff. We've got people stay alive, we've got people's stuff. So we've got, it's security protocols because of what this is going to involve. Security protocols, which is really just stuff. And then we have decision-making structures. So when something really bad happens, when there's an incident, often what will happen is you'll have a complete breakdown of the normal system. People won't be able to communicate the way they normally will. Business as usual just isn't happening kind of by definition. So how do you quickly create some sort of system where decisions can be made now? So how do you create a system to rapidly make decisions? Some organizations have this built in to their normal models. Some of them don't. Some organizations, especially more creative organizations, will often have structures that are designed around making a better decision in a long period of time as opposed to a quick decision, and making a good long-term decision and a decision that's as best as possible, as quickly as possible, are 2 completely different processes. So we're looking at a decision-making structure. So we have a decision structure. So I'm going to go through each of these and talk about the sorts of things that you should consider when looking at them. And then with decision-making structure, I'm going to map out some different ones you consider, specifically some of the ones that are used in emergency preparedness, emergency management, and fun firefighting stuff. So there's going to be that one at the end. So you can look at, do I want to adopt that or not? It's also a fun way to plan a wedding really quick, which that'll maybe be an aside. Okay, so when we look at plan activation, you need to decide how your emergency plan or continuity plan or a plan in general gets activated. A basic example for how to activate an evacuation plan is a fire alarm. So anyone that can find the fire alarm can pull it in a lot of buildings. And when that fire alarm gets pulled, a plan effectively gets activated because a bunch of, sirens go off or a bunch of sprinklers come on. People are, given the hint it's time to get out. Fire department is very often automatically contacted. That is a manual activation of a plan that anybody that is proximal to the fire alarm is able to activate. So that sort of plan activation would be the scope of who's allowed to activate it would be basically anybody in the building. And the effect of that plan when it's pulled is this happen, right? This is the way that you think about designing plan activation. So we have this thing, we have this, emergency situation, or we have a continuity plan, whatever, that's going to do a bunch of stuff. What does activation look like? Who do we want to do the activation? So what does it look like? So what is the process in that? Who do we want to do it? And upon that activation occurring, what things do we expect to happen or what things should happen? Yeah, that's basically it. Deciding this is very important, especially with your continuity plan. Very often, well, actually, that's not necessarily true. It's not especially with a continuity plan. Depending on the organization, it could be especially based on the incident or the immediate 30-second plan. Both are important, regardless. If you make it so only a C-suite executive can activate, only the business owner can activate one of these plans, you gain the benefit that someone who understands this situation and is better able to define what an emergency to the organization would actually be is the one in charge of activating the plan. So what you gain is accuracy. What you lose is flexibility. So you lose the ability for multiple people to be able to activate it. Look, if the C-suite is on vacation, asleep, not in, and there's an emergency and no one can activate, you can't go into emergency mode if it's needed. So you have to make some sort of decision between how many people do I want to be able to activate this thing so I have some level of redundancy built in versus how much error am I willing to allow? Because the more people who can activate something, the greater the risk is of a false alarm, the greater the risk is that, the fire department's going to show up and it was a waste of their time. And, when you activate an emergency, what will often happen is, work for the day has now stopped and the emergency itself can be an impact or a disruption. The activation of the plan, can be a disruption potentially. So these are all things you need to consider. It is not a good idea for employees that have recently been terminated, so their employment has been terminated, to be able to activate your emergency plan. Because if they're angry at the organization and they feel begrudged, they can, on the way out, cause chaos because you've allowed them to do it. People have lost their job and then just pulled the fire alarm. Now, they shouldn't, but they do. So these are things to consider. To what degree should we allow that? That's plan activation. Essentially, you need to have some debate there. Normally, if I was talking one-on-one with a client or, one on the group, whatever, with a client, this conversation would be a lot more specific. We'd look at the sort of what the plan wants to do, and then we'd try to figure out the way that these needs are exactly met. But this will heavily depend on the way your organization's built. So there's a lot in there, but emergency notification. When an emergency happens, you need to be able to contact people very, very quickly. You also need to know how much lag time you have. So what is often important is knowing beforehand what their most reliable contact points are and how long it takes for them to receive a message or to send you a message. This is the section where we come up with the emergency contact list. This is the section where you focus on, okay, look, I need a number that you can be reached at no matter what happens. And when you're building this, one kind of important thing to know is a lot of people are not going to want to give you that number, especially employees that kind of don't want to be bugged when they're not at work. They don't want there to be a number that work can call them, that can reach them all the time, because they want to clock off. There is sometimes some pushback here. What is important, if you want this to be taken seriously, is that the organization needs to clearly distinguish between, basically the organization has to not cry wolf. So like if you've heard the old parable, the boy who cried wolf, where, a fake emergency is called multiple times, then finally when the real one is called, no one respects it, and then the boy gets like eaten by the wolf. That's the basic idea. With this, if you abuse the fact that you have someone's emergency number to bug them or to contact them when something is not an emergency, it breaks the trust in this situation, and it puts your organization in jeopardy if there is an actual emergency. So on one hand, you have to kind of make this resource so that you have access to it if you need it. On the other hand, it will be very tempting if you have a middle manager that really wants to reach a specific employee that is showing signs that they don't have as much buy-in to the organization. So they're repeatedly late, or they don't pick up their phone when they want to contact them, or whatever. For whatever reason, they just want to contact them. There may be this pull for the middle manager to just go into that little binder that has that number that they should pick up on and do a test to see if they'll answer it, right? Now that I have you on the phone, when you come in, like that sort of thing. That is an exceptionally bad idea, and that sort of social phenomenon exists. So you have to think about how to handle that. Perfect world, you have these numbers, it never gets abused, and you have it when you need it. When you're dealing with a smaller team, or when you're dealing with people who are at the sort of employment level where they're just going to answer the phone anyways, you don't really have this problem. But you can run into this. Why am I going through all of this, etc.? In a serious emergency, you may have to basically call everyone in the organization at minimum just to figure out if they're alive. Just to know, because frankly, emergency services might want to know. One of the questions that happens if there's a building fire and everyone evacuates, or if a building has to be evacuated, is, did everybody get out? Right? And sometimes the best way to figure that out is to basically just text everybody, or to find somebody to go, hey, send something letting us know that you're alive, or knowing that you've reached an evacuation point or a meeting point or whatever. So you need something in place for this. You need some way to handle it. Consider things you can do. Use your best judgment. One way to check for this is something called a call tree. Now, I was going to talk about this more in the tests and exercises section later, and I probably bring it up again. But a call tree is a type of test or exercise, depending on how you design it, but generally it's a test. And I'll get into how those are defined later, but whatever. It's a type of thing where you would have an executive, for example, call, I'm going to speak about like a large organization. An executive would call like a senior, like a vice president of a company or something like that, would call all of the directors that report to them. So this is creating a tree. So you have your person at the top of the tree here, and they call all of the directors that report to them. And then the directors call all of the people that report to them. And it goes down like a tree, like it just extends the whole thing until everyone's been contacted. And what you do here is you basically have this person send one message, and you test who didn't reach the message. This can be through a simple like chain email or chain mail of, hey, if you get this, send this along. What some organizations don't do with this, and what I would suggest doing, is build into your chain mail or whatever message they send something for feedback and timestamp. So when you get this, send it to everyone and send it back to me. And if you have it in some sort of text message or email form, you'll have a timestamp, and you'll know how long it took this person at the top to reach the person furthest away from them in the organization. You'll have that sort of time delay. So if you have an emergency notification you have to send out to like all hands on deck, you know how long it takes for that to disseminate through the entire organization. And knowing how long that takes can significantly inform how practical some of your strategies for dealing with this stuff may or may not be. So just consider that. That is a thing. You could also, blast this out to everyone in the organization because you may want to just do an all email, but some messages you don't necessarily want to go out to all, and sometimes you want to test where the time delays are everywhere in your organization. You might find that this particular director here doesn't get communication back from this person frequently, but if you send it directly, they'll get it back immediately. So you know that this relationship, for whatever reason, there's a time delay. You know that now, you can do something with that information. Depends on what you want to do. Okay, so anyways, we have that. Life safety. When you're looking at life and safety, basically consider what you need to keep people alive in the event of an incident. Largely, this is going to be a lot of evacuation plan stuff. This is going to be, okay, we have to evacuate the building. How do we safely evacuate the building? How do we safely get people where they need to go? There are other considerations, but generally, once again, you're talking about building evacuation. You may have some first aid element here. You may have some on-site medical staff if you're a particularly large organization. Like if you're an organization of like 500 plus employees at one site, you may have an on-site nurse. This may become more complicated, but in general, it's usually this area is now not safe. How do we get to safe area? That's usually the piece here that we're talking about in general. With that, when you're evacuating a building, it's pretty straightforward. You have a map of the building and you have to game out from anywhere in this building, how can I get out? So try to find the most obnoxious place in the building possible to escape from, and just look at the map and figure out, how do I get out of this place? And plan it out. And run, tabletop tests that you can do in like 5 minutes. Like just every so often, your health and safety committee or the people who do health and safety for your organization can work on this. This is a pretty easy thing to do. You just walk through a basic, how do I get out of this building thing, and then test it. And then, say, well, we can leave this window. Oh, no, we can't leave that window. It doesn't open. It's plexiglass. Interesting. Well, maybe we have to think about that. When you're looking at evacuations, you will often have conflicts with security because there will be places that could be areas of egress or ingress, exits and entrances, where they're designed to not be escaped through or entered through, to not let people you don't want in. So a lot of security stuff prevents people from moving through it. And in an evacuation, that can be a problem. So sometimes, the security section and the keep people alive section kind of have to have a bit of debate on how to make this practical for everybody. So that's something else to consider. Once you've accounted for getting out of the building, one significant part of evacuations is meeting points. So we've gotten out, where do we meet up to make sure we're all good? Now, I would suggest you have at least 3 tiers of meeting points, probably a 4th as well, but I'll explain why. The first tiered meeting point for a larger building is usually some sort of post or easily identifiable location in the middle of a parking lot. So you'll have a major parking lot outside your building. There will be some sort of light pole in it, and we put evacuation point on the pole. And then when you have to leave the building, go to the pole. That's point 1. Somewhere on the property but not inside the building is usually the first location. The second location is usually either an alternate point on the property that's further back on the opposite side, so you could have 2 initials or whatever, or somewhere just outside the property. So we'll meet on the sidewalk or the street just off the property at this intersection. So you'll have a main corner or something, or main section of a street that people know, if we can't meet there, we'll meet there, right? That's usually your second tier. Your third tier is usually, and large organizations will have this, sometimes some places will just skip to third tier as well. So if you have a smaller business and for whatever reason the parking lot isn't really viable for this, you might skip to, okay, we're going to meet at this specific local donut shop that's always open 24 hours at this location. So if whatever reason you can't meet there, we're all going to meet at that donut shop, and that donut shop is going to love having the customers. And it just happens. In Canada, I You might be surprised if you've heard of Canada before. We have this brand called Tim Hortons. You might be surprised just how many businesses have their third tier evacuation point at that whatever specific Tim Hortons, and everyone just goes to Timmy's. That's just a thing here, and it works. They're open and they meet there, and they go to Timmy's and they go to Timmy's, so it works. Just things to consider. And then the fourth would be some sort of okay, go home, but contact us. This is all stuff to consider. Now, when you get there, you need to find out who's actually there. So there's methods to figure out who was in the building that day and who should be checked on there. You can digitize this. So you can have some sort of clock in, clock out check-in system on a device with a server that's, on-site and off-site for a backup. So if your building's on fire and your servers don't work, you still have the thing, because if your building's on fire and the only server to make sure everybody's alive is in the building that's on fire, then it might not work. So you might need to make sure that it's on a second location so that it actually works when you need it. I'm describing a situation where you have a thing that your strategy is dependent on that is wiped out by the thing that would have activated the strategy, which is completely counterproductive. It's like having, and I've dealt with this with multiple clients, this is a particular pet peeve of mine. It's like having a backup phone line for when you lose power that is a VoIP phone, a voice over IP phone. So I've seen multiple business continuity plans for very large organizations, some of them government, that do services that they're mandated, they're required to be always online because people effectively, their lives are at risk if they're not, where their power outage continuity plan for communication, their backup phone is a VoIP phone, a voice over IP phone. Now, a VoIP phone is a phone that requires internet. If you don't have power, you don't have internet. So in their power outage plan, they have a phone that's supposed to work when there's no power that doesn't work when there's no power. I see it all the time. It drives me up the wall. So anyways, I'm belaboring the point, but you get the point. You need to make sure that your thing actually works. So that's one method. Another method is you can have stuff that are at nearby the major exits of your building that can be grabbed on the way out. There would be two sort of things that would be grabbable here. The first would be like your main sign-in, sign-out sheet. Could be, if you do it by hand, it could be stationed like at basically an exit, and then it could be grabbed by one of the managing people that is evacuating the building. You may have a fire marshal system where you have certain people on each floor of a building or in each section that are the designated, make sure everybody is safe and out evacuation person. That sort of person would probably grab it. If you have a large organization, you know what I'm talking about. I hope. So you could do that. Another thing also that you could have on the outside or just on the inside near the exit is a copy of your material safety data sheet or your safety data sheet or your material safety sheet, the sheet that says all the chemicals that are in the building. You can grab that too when you evacuate. This is really, really important because many fire services, when they arrive to a location, if there's a concern about chemicals, will want to know what's the worst thing in the building. They have this magical little orange book. It's very tiny generally, or they have an app for it, that has every chemical ever listed in there in category, and they basically flip through it if they don't know it off by hand, and they figure out how many kilometers or miles around they have to evacuate the city. And they need to know what the worst thing is in your building. So if you bring out your MSDS and you basically can just hand it to fire when they get there, it helps them out a lot, which when emergency services in this instance get helped out a lot, it tends to help out you a lot in the long term. So there's that piece. But anyways, you can do that. And then further, look, if you don't have some sort of sign-in list, or if it gets lost, or if that's not practical, you can just do an all hands, call in and do it manually, check if every employee is alive, even the ones that didn't come in today, because you don't know. So you can figure that out, right? And you generally want to do that from the evacuation point. So you want to make sure that whoever's doing that at the evacuation point has whatever they need in order to do that. Does this mean that you install a cell phone charging station at the pole in the parking lot? I've seen people do it. You could. Does that mean that if you're going to do this off of cell phone, that you're just going to Timmy's? you're going to Timmy's. Okay, whatever. Use your best judgment. This one, once again, a lot of this gets very, very specific to your organization, and it is tricky for me to give you the best advice for your thing specifically because there's so much variance in what your organization compared to another would do. So that's a summary of a lot of the life safety stuff. And once again, this is not necessarily a long conversation. This is not as much detail as you'd get into with the whole continuity thing we did before, but have the conversation at all and work on it over time, and you should get pretty good at this. It's not that hard. Security protocols stuff. I know how this is going to sound. There are some cases where certain things inside the organization are more important than the lives of certain people in the organization. Now, this is not a legal statement. This is not a moral statement. It is a practical one. The reality is that to some organizations, there are certain things that to the business organization are just more important than some of the people in it. You do not want that concern in the back of someone's mind getting in the way of someone being safe. There have been multiple cases in recent memory of people delaying evacuation because they had to grab a bag, because if you don't have that bag, the business is over. That means that the evacuation was delayed. If you put something in place so that that wasn't a worry, then they're out. They get out of the building and you don't have to worry about that. One of the more famous examples in my area, Ontario, Canada, is many years ago there was a major fire at Chapman's Ice Cream. So Chapman's is a brand of ice cream that is produced in Markdale, Ontario, Canada. And they had a factory fire. I won't get into the very specific details here because it's a famous case. It's really interesting. You can do the deep dive on your own. Maybe we'll do a video later where I go through the case. Markdale, the Markdale Creamery, I think maybe it was in a different location. They moved to Markdale. I think they moved to Markdale. This was in their first location. Anyways, they had a fire. On the way out, one of their staff, this was not in their plan, but one of their staff pulled a recipe drive out of their machines and took it while they evacuated. Because they took the recipe drive, Chapman's was able to get up and running by buying a whole bunch of smaller ice cream shops or renting their space basically and getting their ice cream produced and back on the shelves of distributors like Walmart in, I believe it was about 7 weeks from total obliteration. So their backups, all their records and everything, their digital backups, their paper, their family home, everything was actually attached to this factory. So they basically lost everything minus one offsite storage section that had some ice cream, but they had basically total obliteration. They didn't lose staff because the staff got out safely, and they didn't lose this one recipe drive. But other than that, they lost essentially everything. Now, if it wasn't for that staff member getting that recipe drive out, and I've seen this quote from Chapman's directly in media, so this is public domain. If it wasn't for that, the impact to their business would have been significantly more severe. From a business perspective, that recipe drive was critically important for the furthering of their existence. You don't want to be put in the situation where you go, we should have ran back in the fire for the recipe drive. You do not want to be in that position. So, when you look at this piece, think about what is the sort of stuff that, you know what, I just want to make sure I don't have people worrying about that. Do I put it in an explosion-proof, fire-proof safe, where if an emergency is basically activated, that safe is locked and it, like a backup of it, of whatever the thing is, whatever that critical document or whatever it is like it could survive this whole building being exploded and buried on top of it. That thing, once we go through the rubble, we're going to get it and it's going to be fine. Is it something where you're going to have a copy of it off-site? Is it whatever? But you want to look at this piece and then figure out, what do I need to do so I don't have to play the what's more important, this piece of paper or this person's life game? Because unfortunately, for some organizations, it is the piece of paper, which is, you do not want to be in that headspace. And also, in many countries, legally, You do not want to deal with the consequences of you making the correct business decision, because the correct business decision in the short term may end up being the incorrect decision legally, frankly, and may end up with, look, criminal negligence causing death doesn't look very good in general. Like, there's obvious, I feel like this is obvious. If it's not obvious and you want me to go into this further, let me know, but I feel like this is obvious. Okay, so you want to address that so that you don't have the conflict. What that looks like depends. If you are a government institution that's dealing with national security, then this gets really interesting. But it just depends on what your organization is. Figure what that is so you don't have that conflict. You don't want this to be delayed by this. Decision-making structure. Okay, how do we make decisions in an emergency? There are three. There are three broad categories for the sort of structures you can design for making decisions quickly. The first is ad hoc. So the first is, I don't have a structure, I'm going to figure it out. Ad hoc is really inexpensive in the short term. Ad hoc does kind of work. Unfortunately, ad hoc isn't very structured and doesn't really work. It's not as good as having something established. Most organizations that don't do anything to design this beforehand kind of fall into ad hoc and just wait until the boss shows up, hopefully, and try to figure it out. It can work. It's, once again, inefficient. I'm going to erase this so I have the space.